All right, welcome to Halitics. So glad to be talking to you today. It is Thursday, yes, Thursday, May 2nd, and I'm especially pleased because Bill Neal rejoins us on the Halitics program. Good morning, or good afternoon, Bill. How you doing?
Thanks, Hal. Thanks for having me back. It's timely. Let's put it that way.
It really is, and I appreciated your reaching out to me. I actually hadn't heard from you in a while, and I didn't even realize why not, or that I hadn't. We'll get to that in just a little bit. I do want to center, Bill. We're going to talk about Israel-Gaza. We're going to talk about the campus protests. We're going to talk about what you've been posting about at your Substack at William R. Neal. But as I mentioned off air, I always want to today and yesterday and tomorrow center the real victims, as I see it, of the struggles at home and abroad. Right now, the people of Gaza, Palestine more generally, but specifically Gaza. And you had a reaction to that feeling, that sentiment.
Yeah, well, there's a curve in my postings which have intensified over the past 10 days. They're going up more frequently. And my own position is shifting from, I wouldn't have called it nuance, but certainly not ready to embrace, for example, what Chris Hedges has been saying all along. If you don't get the picture that it's genocide by now, you're not looking at the evidence. I've been much slower to get there, and I may still hesitate to say it's full blown, but South Africa is making the case legally now, and there's a lot of reality and symbolism in it. It will horrify Israeli supporters, of course. But what I think pushed me even further was when the World Central Kitchen distributors were blasted as 7, and listening, even with an apology, to how that happened with the destruction of all the hospitals and all the journalists killed and other aid workers. I also contribute to Doctors Without Borders, who have lost personnel and facilities. And then my memory goes back to the strafing of the USS Liberty, the spy ship that we had off the coast during the 67 war. About 37 dead U.S. sailors and more than 100 wounded. And that's still controversial. But I add it all up and I say these are not accidents. Israel is out to destroy Hamas, no matter the civilian cost, despite the equivocations, and we try to be careful. You look at the images of Gaza, the more than 100,000 casualties, and a new offensive in the pipeline, and the futility of U.S. protests, and you say, no, this is not saying Hamas is wonderful. They stand for anything that, I clearly do. And it's not clear where the civilians in Gaza would vote today, but the level of destruction and the futility of the tactics, given the way Hamas is going to fight. And you don't have to be a military teacher at West Point to understand that's the way they're going to fight. They don't have an air force. They don't have tanks. So they're going to do what guerrilla movements always have done in history, swim with the sea of the people, which is, I think, Mao's phrase during the Chinese Civil War.
Well, Bill, let me just jump in. You can see the numbers I put up there. They're horrific. The close to 35,000 now identified as dead. Total casualties over 100,000. And the dead I mentioned in yesterday's program is probably seriously undercounted because, for example, they claim now, they believe thousands may be under the rubble at the hospitals in Khan Yunis and elsewhere.
It brings to mind, it couldn't help but bring back my Vietnam War protest days when you weren't celebrating the Viet Cong, at least most were not. The extreme left was. But you were saying the price in killed civilians is just too high. And, the other reason I read a book about the Algerian Civil War with France was that it was the tactics of the French so mirrored what we did in Vietnam, slaughter, unbelievable, tens and hundreds of thousands of civilians killed. I don't want to see that ever happen again. Even if you have a better case for the claims of the competing factions, that's just unacceptable if we're trying to move humanity forward.
Well, Bill, one of the defenses, if you will, by, I guess, the pro-Israel people is how they would describe themselves, is that, whenever there's a war, there's going to be civilian deaths. And during World War II, we killed close to 200,000 Japanese civilians in just two bombing attacks. Look what we did to Dresden. So we were attacked on Pearl Harbor just like Israel was attacked on October 7th. So basically, like you said, anything goes, and we shouldn't be criticizing Israel. It's fine for us to keep supporting her with our weapons, with our bombs, with our depleted uranium military supplies.
Yeah, I'm not sure that given, the empire, Japan that we were fighting, and really the nature of the battles on the islands was in large, like a race war in terms of the intensity and the mutilations, treatment of prisoners on both sides. But I don't think that's comparable to the situation in Gaza. And if we haven't made moral progress since mass bombing of civilians and the atomic bombs as legitimate tactics, since then, we're all in a lot of trouble, which is where we are. And that's exactly.
Well, I mean, you make a great point, right? It wasn't necessary just because maybe we can argue, and I probably would, that certainly our entry into World War II was justified and that we should have probably been fighting the Nazis earlier than we were. That doesn't mean it was okay to turn Dresden into rubble. It doesn't mean it was okay to obliterate two vibrant Japanese cities.
The objective, and I'm watching this documentary, I think it was BBC, about Bomber Harris, the head of the RAF Bomber Command during World War II. That was his policy, to break German will by going after the civilian targets. There were many studies of the effect of the bombings after the war. First of all, it's clear from the way that teenagers fought the Russians in the rubble of Berlin. That's all that was there, rubble. To the very end, that civilian morale in Germany was not broken. They fought to the bitter end. And then secondly, the production statistics and slave labor from all parts of Europe was used in the Nazi factories did not drop. It seemed to go up. So, the practical argument that you're going to break the enemy's will, just as in Vietnam.
I think you strengthened their will. I've read stories that there was before, when the war began against the German Battle of Britain, when they were bombing London. Right. For a while there, the German command concentrated its bombing on the working class sectors. Yes. And there was a lot of resentment and anger at the wealthy. But once the Germans started bombing and Mayfair and Piccadilly and Kensington, then there was like, oh, we're all English. We're all in this together. We're all being attacked. And it seems to me that's kind of what this is doing, right? It's unifying the Gazans.
Yeah, Hal, I'd like to leave your listeners with a vivid image that I've seen so many images and also footage of thousands of young Gazan men trying to find bodies in the rubble. And I'm thinking to myself, well, they're the future recruits. What is their reaction going to be? They've lost family members. They can't find them. Hospitals are being blown up. Horrific operations are proceeding without anesthetic. And what do you think, that they're going to start a guerrilla movement against Hamas? No, I think the more likely reaction is give me a firearm. I'm ready to die because I'm looking at my existence and saying I have nothing to lose. And that point is made, I think, by the pro-Palestinian academics. that it's the world's largest.
And just pro-humanity, I would say,
Yeah.
pro-life, if you will, using a term that's been co-opted by the anti-abortion movement, but truly pro-life folks who just want the killing to stop. I want to play this video because I think it goes to exactly what you're talking about. This was just posted today from Al Jazeera. By the way, William R. Neal with us. I had you incorrectly identified as Arlen Grossman from yesterday's program. I thought I got all the William Neals in there instead of Grossman's, but I screwed one up. So William with us. Check him out on Substack. Here's the video from Doctors Without Borders and others.
Just decimated. There's no way you could all come back to life here the way it's just been flattened. The video doesn't do justice. You have to be here in person. Many people have used terms in different conflicts. You know, I've been to Syria, I've been in Somalia, and you know, so many other areas around the world. And people have mentioned, it's like an Armageddon. It's like you know, something undescribable. Everywhere I saw was destruction in Khan Yunis. Not a single building was standing. Be it hospitals, schools.
Most of our patients were, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 years of age for these lower extremity shrapnel wounds. And that's something I've never dealt with. It was something that was new. I didn't even see that in 2009. It was a lot of adult patients back then, but this is really a different scope of, patient population that I just never seen.
I'm not a politician, I'm not a diplomat. All I know is that as a healer, the one who has taken an oath to heal people, if Rafah is attacked, there will be complete loss of life. And the healthcare system will not be able to take care of this.
All right, so Bill, what should we be doing? Are we doing it? What is Joe Biden doing in response to this humanitarian crisis?
No, we're not handling it well. I don't know. And my writings about Joe Biden, I have, I go through the trilogy, couldn't stand up to Senator Manchin and those long negotiations. You can't stand up to Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. I don't see, without a opposition to Hamas, that is willing to make some concessions ideologically to how they view the state of Israel surfacing. And it's not. There's no sign of it at all. The only other option for the U.S. to get behind a serious peace movement is for someone who is a Palestinian and a Gazan in exile in some fairly neutral forum, which implies think tank, probably in one of the wealthy Gulf states somewhere, or maybe in the West, who can somehow create a opposition that people who want to see the end to the killing can rally around. I don't see the peace forces inside Israel, the oldest Israeli left, as having a chance after October 7th. The mood of the nation, the power of the religious right in Israel and the Knesset. I look at the 6 or 7 parties, and I'm saying I don't see a peace movement possible inside Israel. Maybe get a temporary ceasefire to get the hostages back, but I just finished looking at Andrew Bacevich's comments online because nobody's been referring to him, and that's why he's so pessimistic, and that's why I refer to the war in Algeria, even though they won their independence, the killing, the dominant party, the FLN, was so militarized. The killing went on. They had, after they won independence, the Islamic fundamentalists revolted, and there were hundreds of thousands slaughtered in internal purges and a civil war, essentially, after independence. So I'm looking at this picture, and that's why I checked back into the Grand Hotel Abyss. I don't see a clear way out. And I'm not in a position to.
So let me interrupt because it's very, very depressing to hear that. I don't say you're wrong at all, but if that's the view and if that's the reality, then are we wasting our time doing this live stream? Are the students who are putting their, education on the line, many of whom we saw attacks on the pro-Palestinian students at UCLA.
No,
Are they just wasting their time, or worse, putting themselves in danger, risking their degrees for no good reason?
no, Hal. The moral conscience in a democracy, win or lose, pessimistic or optimistic, and looking at the possibility of a Trump triumph and the end of the American Republic as we know it. I could have chosen the path of the Frankfurt group that the book, Grand Hotel Abyss is centered around. But that's not been my emotional reaction. My intensity level is going up. My writing level goes. I want to be heard, like William Lloyd Garrison. And the worst thing you can do at a time when APEC seems to dominate the whole dialogue is just fade into the woodwork and say it's hopeless. It might be hopeless. I don't have any other response. And I'm not a pacifist, as you know, from my stance in the war in Ukraine. And I knew the peace movement. I knew Gene Athey when I lived in Montgomery County, and I had a chance to sign on. And it was also part of my difference with Rabbi Michael Lerner. And I looked inside myself, an older man than I was, certainly as a student. And there's part of me inside that at the end, if I have to fight, I will fight. I don't know what that means at my age.
So again, you're kind of like a Camus. You're like Dr. Rieu in The Plague. He just keeps going out there fighting the plague, even though there's no evidence that he's really making any difference. Although he does give comfort. People seeing him out there doing something is preferable to doing nothing at all.
And it's very interesting that you brought that book and Camus up, because he gets considerable attention in the French war in Algeria, because he was
which he supported. Yeah, he backed it.
He was looking for Algeria finding some accommodation inside the French Republic and inside Algeria, short of complete independence. And of course, the militants from all sides just outflanked him, which is another reason. I mean, I look at all the history of freedom movements, anti-colonial movements, what happened in China, what happened in Russia and their civil wars, and Cuba. It always seems to drift towards violence and the most militant parties winning, for better or worse. And, I'm not praising that. That's the historical record, and why it would be so hard looking at Hamas. Why it's the answer why we don't have any peaceful opposition parties saying let's compromise. This can't go on. First of all, I don't think they could survive. Hamas has guns, and the only guns I think inside Gaza. They have a record of killing any serious dissenters, and that's the historical record, which is why I say.
So really what you're saying is the Israeli hardliners and Hamas are engaged in a dance that is in certain ways mutually beneficial, because each one's power derives from the extremism of the other side, right? That there's an inability to come up with a peaceable solution.
And you're probably familiar with this, just over the boundary of known evidence is the discussion that all along Hamas was useful to Israel. Israel had total control of what goes in and out and over Gaza. They are the most sophisticated big brother operation in the world right now, maybe even better than Putin in terms of protecting their people. And
and their propaganda is unmatched. The Hasbara is unmatched.
By conscious intent and funding and tactics and technology. That's right. And the fact that Netanyahu allowed Hamas to head down this, knowing Hamas was against the two-state solution, as Israeli politics was mostly as well. You have to ask yourself, I mean, what, and then the other, and you can't prove it. We'll never know the total breakdown of this massive surveillance system prior to October 7th.
Well, isn't the way to break through all this what I've been calling for over a decade, a true one-state solution where Israel incorporates Palestine into Israel with the residents in those regions, full citizens, full political rights, and full economic rights as well. So you don't have this massive poverty that has been so, destabilizing in Gaza and to the West Bank.
That is the well-intentioned and principled meaning of the term from the river to the sea by people who want to see equal rights and representation in a one-state solution that incorporates Palestinians and existing Israeli citizens. Do I think that's possible? No.
But it could be. It's only not possible because the Israeli government says no, and the U.S. government goes along with that, in fact, supports that.
Yeah,
but if the U.S. government said, we're not giving you a friggin' penny for anything until you take your foot off the throat of the Palestinian people, and you start incorporating them into your country, I think that could happen.
I've been digging into this further. First, I feel I've had no choice because the situation in Gaza and the Middle East has almost totally, in the popular mind, displaced the details of the war in Ukraine and the nature of Putin and so forth. But that's a topic for another day in future writing, which I hope to get to. But the further I looked into the current situation in the Middle East, and I've had most of the major nodes from the founding in 47 and 48 back in my memory, so it's like a refresher course. Right of return, that's and equalization.
Well, I agree. That's a really problematic because it's sort of like people live there now, but maybe you don't have right of return, or you have to figure some kind of a way to finesse that issue. But that doesn't mean that you don't have right of full citizenship. You might not get to return to the exact same plot of land that your great-grandparents occupied, and that's unfortunate, but that's the way it goes, right? But there could be right of full citizenship.
Let's add to the logic of right of return for all the Palestinians displaced from their original homes and now on the West Bank, the compensation, financial contribution, also for what's happened. In the Israel that I'm looking at, I don't think that's possible.
Well, I'll just say this. If it isn't, then I don't believe peace is possible, because I would say that's the only way ultimately to get to peace.
Right now, that is my conclusion, and that's exactly what I read this morning on it from November, Andrew Vacevich's conclusion as well. And, the question for American citizens is this. Look, and I've said this very clearly. America will never let Israel be overrun in the sense that 100,000 armed Arabs are going to storm the gates. We're not going to let that happen. But it's also true that I don't think our national interest is one-to-one with the state of Israel any longer. They're, both are being dragged down by this impossibly, military stance and slaughter. That's the only way to put it. And you can go through the layers of describing Israel as starting with at least an apartheid state, and engaged now in ethnic cleansing by the trapped, people in Gaza, and the bombing and the hospitals and this destruction of every human amenity, from libraries to mosques to everything else, killing of aid workers. And then it's going to go on further when they move into one of the last great cities. And then you see how somebody like Chris Hedges says, no, it's not on the scale of what happened in the Holocaust, but it's, in terms of the attributes of a genocide.
It could get there. It could get to that, Bill. Bill, you said something that I think is how I feel too, is we need to keep speaking out. We need to keep raising our voices, and hopefully folks hear us. But what if our voices are being throttled, suppressed by corporate power? And that's something you actually expressed concerns. That's how I got you on the program today, was I'm showing the transcript from, ironically enough, Google Voice of the message, or Google Message of the Google Voice call you sent to me. And you note none of my emails got through Comcast. Can't figure out what happened since I've been tough on the Israeli government. Do you think there might be a link between your critical stance towards Israel and perhaps your emails no longer getting the net neutrality treatment?
I have an assigned number. The case inside Comcast is bumped up to their tech specialist, who the last thing I heard is we're going on 24 hours. Yesterday, they were working on it. They had no answer. I'm not going to answer that, Hal, beyond, because I don't have the evidence to prove it. But I do know a little something, having written about the electronic grid network and all the major transmission facilities there in suburban Virginia. I'm not sure Comcast is looking in the right place. In other words, my emails up to about 800 went out. They apparently never reached the audience because, I've verified by that phone calls now. So it may not be right under Comcast's nose in a local office, but there would be collation nodes where everybody that's, all the outgoing Comcast mail goes. And who knows after that? I mean, that seems to me that's the problem that has to be answered. I haven't been obviously hacked in my other operations. Today, I could send a Comcast to Gmail, but I sent one message. But
well, I got your email this morning, so I appreciate that.
I don't know whether my batches of 80 to 90 going out with my original message are reaching my Comcast audience. And all I can note is that I've used the system for 20 years, and this is the first time anything like this has happened. And the fact that Comcast has no quick answer, we had this switch was on. They're scratching their heads too, and I still haven't heard from them. So we'll leave it at that. You'll never know.
Well, I love having you on, Bill. This is a really important topic, and I've noted a stagnation or even a slight reduction in the total number of viewers I'm getting. And although I've tended to believe I'm just perhaps not that good, I'm not that entertaining, people don't really care what I have to say, I'd much prefer to think that it's Google that's saying to, not using my programs to be shared through its algorithm, and it's kind of throttling them down. And there's no question any algorithm would immediately flag them as pro-Israel. I mean, strike that, anti-Israel, pro-Palestine. They're pretty much every title. I've used the word genocide in several of my titles. I've been very critical of Israel in the titles themselves. You don't have to watch the videos to know what I'm doing here. Maybe there is something to that.
I'm not going to name drop here, but about 3 months ago, a very prominent progressive historian, well-known, sent me an email, and he's been on my email list for a long time. We've met a couple times, but we're not real close at a personal level. And he said, what's with Maryland politics? I'm writing a new book, and I can't find any substance in all the political dialogue inside Maryland as it exists. And I said, well, congratulations. I reached that conclusion a long time ago when I wrote about the dynamics within the O'Malley administration. So I had to go into my physical and electronic archives to pull out what I had written. I sent it to him. And, but I mean, this is true. I mean, but you don't have to throw somebody in prison to isolate dissenting viewpoints. You just ignore them. And to me, that is, it's personally grating, especially since I try to work really hard to put responsible stuff out, even in high electric, high voltage topics like this. I try to speak no further than the evidence I can find and evaluate my sources also for the reasons of, complete one-sidedness and how they handle evidence. And so, yes, that's
you're certainly more responsible than I am, Bill. Let me say that. So if they're throttling you, they're probably going after me, although my audience may not. They may not worry about me as much as they might about you. You can see Google has taken reprisals. It has, retaliated against workers who don't agree with its position. It's just business for them, right? They'll just do business with anybody. They used to say do no evil, but they'll work with anybody at this point.
I didn't like the idea of Chris Hedges showing up on the Russian station, right? What was it, Russian Times or
RT, Russia Today, I believe.
Russia Today. I was, if I had the chance, I think I probably would, and I never got an invitation, would have said no, simply because that's to me desperation to be heard, and it was going to backfire. But Al Jazeera, I think, is a little different. I saw the interview that their reporter, who's got great American academic credentials, and
it's a really important news site. I don't see any
he
problems.
Was stone-faced interviewing Nelson Lichtenstein, who's an expert on Palestine, gave him no smile or nodding of the head or anything, and that's pretty tough journalism. And I checked the credentials on this guy, the interviewer, and I believe he's a PhD. He's an American academic. He's really been around the block. He's one tough guy. And what did I put when I wrote this up to that effect? I said Israel has passed the law to ban Al Jazeera. And I think it's gone into effect.
You can't get Al Jazeera in Israel. And what we've seen is that Al Jazeera has consistently been proven correct. Its reporting has been determined to be reasonable, responsible. I know The Lancet did an analysis of the death count provided by the Hamas health ministry and concluded that the numbers that they were providing seemed appropriate, seemed accurate based on everything they could find. One thing you see on Al Jazeera that you don't see on many from Israeli news is everything's documented. Photos, videos, sources. Yep. Israel News has a lot of bald assertions by people
I can't give them a full academic evaluation of all their sources, all their treatments, and I noted because I felt I had to that who funds them, the Qatari government, all or in part. So I put that in there. So look, it's not an endorsement for all of time, but it just seemed to me from what I saw in that interview, they were pretty neutral and almost hostile to one of the leading American academics who is no shirking angel when it comes to
there's just no perfect news source, right? I mean, every news station is going to be biased. The news is, there's no homeless people that own newspapers and radio stations and TV stations, so that viewpoint isn't going to be presented. There aren't, peace activists aren't advertising, it's oil and gas corporations and for-profit pharmaceutical companies and weapons manufacturers that are underwriting a lot of the news that we see in this country. So it's hard for me to say that what you see on Al Jazeera or RT is going to be more biased or more incredible.
Yeah, and Russia, let's say Russia was very shrewd in setting this up. It gave a voice to American dissidents who pick all the unfinished humanitarian necessities of American life and features them under the guise of honest journalism. It's very shrewd. You can't lose from their point of view. But I cautioned people years ago when they asked me about, because they were saying things they liked on there. I said, it's not worth it. If it's totally funded by Russia, that's a problem. And maybe you could say the same thing about Al Jazeera, but it looks like to me from the reporters that they're a little more independent. And RT had some editorial and reporter revolts too. It's risky. Yeah.
Well, NPR has had revolts, so it's
even if it meant a bigger forum.
New York Times has reported revolts. Let's get back to your Substack, though. William Neal, Substacker at William R. Neal. So this jumped out at me. You wanted to comment on the protests at the various campuses, and you focused, at least with this headline, on Mike Johnson's visit to Colombia?
Yes, I did. Because he was outrageous, and and the irony is, here you have a speaker condemning mobs on campus, in quotation mobs, when he voted essentially with the mob that tried to overthrow the U.S. government election results on January 6th twice, and voted against impeachment. So, right there. Then, as an American studies major, when he got into the virtue of the founding fathers, who certainly were not beneath using the mobs in the streets of Boston at various times, including physical violence against British officials to get their way. And it goes, on and on. Hannah Arendt, the great historian of the rise of totalitarianism, I met her through everybody referring to her till I finally this year read her original work. And she's got in a crucial chapter, capital, meaning the owners of capital, and the mob, which, is not a bad way to look at the merchants behind the independence movement in America and using the street. They weren't lynching people. They were tarring and feathering, beating them up, destroying their property, the British officials, and of course, throwing the tea in the harbor. And so, when the moral cause is burning, I think you got to give students some leeway. How far I want to take that, it's case by case. If they're encamped on the green, but nobody else wants to use it, and they're not interfering or harassing or waving a cudgel in Israeli students' faces, I would have been prudent to me to let the semester run out.
Well, we've seen that at some campuses, right? So Wesleyan University, my alma mater, sent out a letter saying
the level of antagonism between the points of view is escalated to fistfights and
it's
work.
True.
So,
well, we're going to go to a video. I had a good news segment yesterday, Bill. I talked about Brown University, where the university actually negotiated with the protesters and agreed to consider a proposal to divest from Israel companies, from companies that do business in Israel. And I thought that was the right way to handle it. I don't know that the protesters will get what they want. And as far as I'm concerned, I want them to get what they want. But at least Brown did treat them with respect and did, acknowledge the justice of their cause. And I think that's really important because, we hear a lot about the, content neutrality, and it shouldn't really matter. The message isn't as important as being treating everyone the same. And I agree with that to a degree. Everyone should have the right to speak. But that said, the message is important. And if you're anti-genocide, I think that you have a moral leg up on those who are opposing you.
Yeah, it's a tough call, Hal. Obviously, I respect and was a participant in serious learning at Lafayette, and that was the tenor of the institution most of the time. So if you look at fractured American politics, if you have every cause in contemporary American politics going the full moral Monty route on campus, you don't, unless you want to dispense with the serenity and calm and that's necessary for some of the study, as well as the fierce debates that should go on in the classrooms and through speakers, which isn't happening out here in Western Maryland colleges. And so it is a balance, and I can't come down on one side or the other, except to say that not all causes are equal in their urgency. And when as in Vietnam, the level of loss of life and in Gaza and Palestine reaches this point, I think you got to make some acknowledgement, as Larry Summers didn't, when I saw his interview at.
Well, he's such a jerk. That guy's such an ass. I can't stand that guy.
He handled it all as an abstract issue of free speech and order for the learning that has to go on campuses, but never addressed the actual nature of what's driving this today. And, it is comparable to Vietnam that I lived through, the level of loss of violence from the sky and other measures and loss of life, regardless of who was right or wrong in the war. It was for the sake of humanity a losing cause. And you look at where our relations with North Vietnam are today. I look down at different shoes I'm wearing and where they're made, right? I mean, so and you wonder how we have trade with that country from either perspective.
Well, it's really, the trade issue is something else I often focus on because I think our trade policy is so harmful to American workers, but also empowers tyrants around the world. But we can get into that on another program, perhaps. I want to go to UCLA, where we're seeing a really serious campus violence, like what we saw at Columbia as well. But just real quick, why I think it's, among other issues, the way the justice of the protesters can bear itself in the solution is if the college president, unlike the president, for example, at Columbia, goes to the board and says, look, they really got some good points. You got to admit it. Look at these pictures. Look at these images. Look at the videos. Look at what they're seeing. They're making some really strong arguments. So maybe we really need to elevate their demands. That is one way that a responsible administration, I think that is what happened at Brown University. But I think that's one way a responsible administration would act. Unfortunately, right, the Egyptian Muslim woman in charge of Columbia took a very different tack, and I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah, well, there's a politics to running colleges, right? You have the faculty, you have the students, you have the board of trustees, and you have the donors. And you know how that plays out, right?
And the last two make the decisions, right? The gold rule, the golden rule.
I have to add a detail for our viewers that I didn't in my writing, reminiscing about my days at Lafayette and how virtuous and peaceful and constructive we all were. The chaplain of the college was the last tie to the Presbyterian Church. Lafayette was going secular, but he was a Presbyterian. His name was Pete Saby, and he turned the chaplain's office printing press over to the strike committee, and he was gone within a couple of years. So I have to add that as a footnote, that in that sense the college did retaliate against pro-strike forces. They felt that was inappropriate, but without his Mimeo machine, which was how we did it at the time, to run educational packets off and campaign literature for any war candidates, I don't know what we would have done, right? No, the students didn't have one of those expensive machines in their dorm, and there were no computers at that time. So poor Pete Saby, he was an outstanding guy. He was prison chaplain to Black prisoners, or to prisons in Northampton County as well. So it kind of echoes Chris Hedges' work.
That's what Hedges does as well, right?
As a teacher to prisoners and so forth. So I admire Pete Saby. I know him pretty well, and I protested his dismissal. Yeah.
Well, there's certainly value, I think, in being on the right side of an issue, the just side. So glad to have Bill Neal with us. We're going to talk for at least 15 or so more minutes. I want to go a full hour, maybe more, because we've got to get to the endorsements. We're saving that for the end in Western Maryland, and Maryland more generally, the state and national election, which is coming up in just a couple, well, it's less than 2 weeks now. It's I guess 1 week from this Tuesday. But let's just do this video real quick, because I want your thoughts, and then I want to get to the primary in Maryland. So here we go. This is from, oh, by the way, real quick also, if you want to join us, I will take a call. I hope someone does call in. I haven't been getting the calls. I'm disappointed. 240-242-5646, and told you several times, please do subscribe if you haven't yet done so, and click like. Let's go to the City of Angels, Los Angeles.
According to the Daily Bruin, that's UCLA's campus paper, around 60 pro-Israel demonstrators tried breaching the pro-Palestine encampment in Dixon Plaza late last night. They were using a bullhorn, alternating between talking and playing music. Now things got escalated, heated, when the Bruin reports that the demonstrators began fighting with each other. Campus police was seeing that, and in riot gear, they broke it all up. Now later, 2 other counter-protesters were reportedly chased off campus. And take a look at the encampment today. Everything again was quiet. You see all the Free Palestine signs there, a lot of signs. The encampment, there's cones protecting it, and nearby there is another encampment that appears to be pro-Israel. Some of the signs there that we saw read "Free them now," referring to the hostages that were taken by Hamas back in October of last year. Many of those hostages still being held in captivity.
All right, I'm going to stop it there. I thought they did a pretty fair and balanced, that's Fox Local, not Fox National, Fox News, but they did a fair and balanced report there. And they don't mention this, but a lot of observers felt that the pro-Israel disruptors were given free rein, that the police kind of stood back and let them go after the pro-Palestine protesters with sticks and missiles that they were throwing at them. So there is that allegation. On the other hand, the pro-Israel students say that a pro-Israel woman was beaten, and that's what triggered them. My big issue here, Bill, is the police failed. They should have been, have the separate camps, but you got to be able to prevent this if you possibly can. Or maybe tempers are too high. This issue is too serious. It's too close to the bone for people, and we cannot get along.
I think that type of violence under the circumstances is inevitable, but I don't condone it. And at my social dorm at Lafayette, during my entire 4 years, we had a kind of a GI Bill guy, Jules Manger, who had lost part of his foot to a landmine or other Viet Cong explosive in Vietnam. And we, of course, had a heated debate also in my social dorm. Was the head of the Young Americans for Freedom, which was the right-wing group. But and we had many heated discussions. But maybe it was due to the personality makeup of both these guys and my own. It never came to fisticuffs, and it never came to a screaming match with no respect. And that was fortunate. Maybe, who knows why? There's chemistry, personal chemistry that gets involved, and it's broken down. I think it's understandable, and that's when authorities have to step in, whether it should be the outside police. That's the last resort. There's lots of campus. I think Frostburg State University has a much bigger campus police department than poor Frostburg, who has like 4 or 5 patrolmen. So, and there's been no, I don't think any discernible protests at Frostburg that I've heard about. So that hasn't been an issue, but there it is. And, I said I wasn't a pacifist, but once you have the two sides slugging it out, fisticuffs or with sticks or worse in the streets, well, it's a sign of the time, and that poor angel of history is getting battered, and civility with it. And worse is to come with with this proposal if Trump would ever win for detainment camps. I mean, there is the fuel for an American civil war, right?
Is it fair, though, to say, look, Joe Biden seems to be on the side of the genocidal state? He's done zero to rein Israel in whatsoever. He's wrung his hands a few times and muttered a few platitudes, but ultimately he's done nothing except ultimately provide support, provide backing for what Israel is doing. Let me just ask my question in my extremely rhetorical, tendentious way. Is it fair to say, okay, that's really bad, supporting genocide's really bad, but somehow Trump would be even worse, so therefore we have to vote for Biden?
No, and that's why I didn't vote for Biden on my primary ballot or for his electors. I chose uncommitted as a strong signal that things have to change. He said he's a Zionist, and he, he raced to Israel right after the 7th when commentators, who run foreign policy establishment magazines were saying trouble ahead from what we're hearing. This is not, if Israel goes the revenge route, it's going to be a disaster. I mean, this was, within a few days, they could see what was coming. And Biden could not, although, he said some verbal things. But you look at the Biden personality, and I said this sarcastically, and I didn't get any response to one prominent observer in Maryland. I said, Joe's temperament is suited to, brokering the activities in a nice suburban Catholic parish. He is not suited by temperament and the way he's handled his public life to deal with these type of times. First of all, I think back to the days of my youth and the eloquent voices of the anti-war movement and the Black Civil Rights movement, who could get up without notes and speak passionately and when necessary, like RFK, to calm crowds in the streets after assassinations, and we had so many. I mean, that's missing. If you can't speak to your constituents and to the nation, which was my solution to the Joe Biden Manchin standoff, if you couldn't go national to put the heat on Manchin, what are you doing in the president's office with a bully pulpit? I mean, and he can't sustain it. When he does give a tough speech, he disappears. And it may be age or so forth, but I mean, what's missing in American public life is the people that can speak off the cuff eloquently to moral passions and the great divides of the country. And everybody knows we're missing it. I don't think.
And let me just, I agree with what you're saying. I hear you. I can't vote for Joe Biden. I'm going to actually vote in the Democratic primary for Jill Stein. I want to send a stronger message than uncommitted. I'll write her name in. I want to send a stronger message because I fear uncommitted is taken as a sign by the Democratic establishment that folks are ultimately going to come home in the general election. And I don't want them to have that misapprehension, at least with respect to my vote. But I guess where I am with regard to Trump is, and Trump's rhetoric is ugly. There's no way I'm going to defend anything. I'm not here to defend Trump. But what I'm going to say is this: are some overhyping the dangers of a Donald Trump presidency? And one example I'll give is you hear a lot of times how the right to choose, right? Because we're always, the Supreme Court's the bulwark, the protector. And now it's, gone full right wing and they repealed Roe v. Wade. And yet some would argue that there are certainly silver linings to that cloud. For example, in Arizona, the legislature just voted to repeal a 160-year-old law that made abortion illegal in all circumstances. In Kansas, a citizens' initiative refused to repeal the right to choose. So it would seem that maybe making this a political question actually has benefits for progressives, for the progressive movement.
Yeah, one of the longest things I've written in years in my quote retirement days was my summary of the conclusion I reached was Trump was a tremendous threat to American democracy and had crossed red lines, even in Republican political scientists' mind, towards fascism by the choice of his words. And so I concluded that I had to take the worst of his language seriously, and especially this threat to put, it would be millions, according to the formula, to arrest illegals without proof that they're here illegally, put them in camps. First of all, you're talking 10 million people, and all the, given the vermin that the label that he's applied to the left, and it would certainly apply to you and me. You don't have identity papers with you, Hal? you're going to a nice, I don't know where it would be, Southern Maryland or Western Maryland, till we can sort it out. So we're off the air for the next 6 months, if we're lucky. The potential in that and the mechanics of it are just unacceptable. And if you can't see that to what happened in the Weimar Republic, I can't help you. And that's, that leads to the conclusion is, if I have to, I'll vote for Biden to prevent it. I don't know whether that's going to be the choice we're going to face. I don't know whether Biden's going to last through the late spring and summer to the convention. We'll see. It's awful, and it really does bring back the dilemmas I've worried about for years. What would I have done between 1919 and 1933 in Weimar Germany? Because the left was extraordinarily divided. I don't think I would have been a communist. I would have been a socialist Democrat. And they were half in German institutions, and their most radical voices were half out. But Germany could not. Their institutions could not handle the level of divisions in that society. And the winds of history that blew in Germany beyond everyone's control, losing World War I, the great inflation of 22 and 23, and then the final kicker that got Hitler the chance, because he never won a complete majority, the Great Depression. And the U.S. banks calling in their loans when the Depression hit the U.S. So, I mean, the misery level in Germany, which drove, Hannah Arendt has a marvelous phrase. She doesn't put the burden of the mob on the German working class. She said the process of modernization in Germany and what it had gone through for what it described disoriented and broke Germans of all classes away from their normal moorings. They were unmoored people, susceptible to somebody with a passionate call for German unity. And you know who that was.
Well, I mean, I think that's how Americans feel now to a very significant degree. There's really no national purpose. There's no real goal. We have become viewed, certainly we're perceived by elites, by institutions, as consumers first and foremost, and then secondly, perhaps as labor input.
Yeah, about 6 years ago, a Democratic woman from, I won't mention the state, but she was a professional consultant and a good one, I think. She's very talented. Did the artwork as well as the politics. And, we would have arguments, the idealist me, the intellectual historian, saying that ideas and what you stand for are very important. And she took this gut level position. It's the way candidates and their policies strike people in the gut of what they're experiencing in their day-to-day lives. And unfortunately, I think she's won that argument. And what does that mean when I apply to Joe Biden? People look at the body language and what comes out of his mouth, and they say, I can't square this with the great nation I want America to be. He just doesn't look like the leader that we need and deserve. Unfortunately, how they fill that in with alternatives is not a very happy thing either. But I mean, there it is at the gut level. I look at Biden and I hear my neighbors cringe, even Democrats, but it's just Biden has outlived his time and his postures. And I regret to say that. Yeah.
So there's the vote by Bill Neal in Maryland in the presidential primary for uncommitted, with the caveat that you will likely vote, or you will almost certainly vote for whoever the Democratic nominee is, whether it's Biden or you're suggesting possibly an alternative, whether Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom. I'm just throwing names out there. I will say I'm quite confident it's going to be Joe Biden unless he suffers some kind of catastrophic health problem, but we'll find out. There's other races on the ballot. We're talking about Western Maryland. So let me just show the from your article. And again, this is from Bill's Substack, which is I don't have the whole, William R. Neal, what is it, Substack at William R. Neal. I think if you just type in Substack, this is why I did. I don't want to have some hugely long URL.
It's williamrneal.substack.com, and that should get you there to the list of everything I've written, and the most recent one will be at the top with
I think it's in the YouTube description. If it isn't, I'll put it in there as well. But also, I think if you just type Substack at William R. Neal, you'll get it easily. So the other race, we talk other races. The biggest one besides president is U.S. Senate, and this is the seat Ben Cardin is retiring from. You endorsed David Trone. And there are several reasons you give, but you certainly put electability over the Republican right at the top. Before we get to electability, do you see any real meaningful difference in policy? Because I almost always focus on policy and rarely look at electability unless I think the two candidates are very similar.
Are we talking about Trone versus Hogan or Trone?
Trone versus also Brooks first, and then you can get to Trone versus Hogan, because I'm not sure the differences between them are so stark either. But let's talk about Trone versus also Brooks.
Yeah, and the way the party, the last image I saw on, I think it was the Washington Post, which I now subscribe to, at $1 a week. I couldn't resist, like the Wall Street Journal, but all the Democratic establishment was in a picture. Steny Hoyer and Jamie Raskin and Ike Leggett from Montgomery County were there endorsing Angela Alsobrooks. And what's my Trone is positioning himself as the maverick, despite being a multi-billionaire. He didn't get the endorsement of the establishment, and he's kind of annoyed them with no question about it. And I'm very pragmatic. I don't know whether it comes down to major issues voted in Congress, whether there would be a difference. But there's a difference in my mind coming down to the brutal realities of 2024 if we have to face Larry Hogan and Donald Trump. That my observation that the last two black candidates for governor versus Larry Hogan lost substantially. And my perception, and I said this to a good black Democratic leader in Western Maryland the other day, because I called her to see whether my articles were getting through. And she's a Trone supporter as well. It really surprised me. And I said, look, I'll be blunt here. The perception that I hear from citizens in Western Maryland is any Democratic candidate, especially a black one from Prince George's County, carries such heavy historical baggage that it's two strikes against them before they even get out of the gate. It's and I wish that weren't true. I wish it had nothing to do with race, but it does have to do with corruption and long perception. I don't know whether.
Well, I mean, regardless of whether an African American can get the vote in Western Maryland of white working class voters. There are real concerns about corruption in the Alsobrooks administration in Prince George's County. There's no question that she was very strongly supported by developers, and there's a question of what was she getting in return for that? What did she get in return for policies that were pro-developer? The young African American progressives who have been recently elected to the Prince George's County Council have endorsed Trone, Crystal Oriata,
I was really shocked. I was really shocked to hear this from this otherwise traditional black leaders run for office out here in Western Maryland. And so I was amazed that we shared stories.
Ed Burrows, that's the other. I just want to say Ed Burrows, also an up-and-coming young black leader, supports David Trone. And these are pretty far to the left. I mean, these are folks that, the populist left supports.
Well, my concern about the role of the power of American business and their lobbyists in American political life. Then I looked at the AFL-CIO rating for Trone, and it was 100%, which really surprised me because he's in the retail. His workers are the retail sector, but he's hiring former prisoners.
He's viewed as a pro African American employer. Let me put it
Yeah,
that way.
which
He
sends
hires
us
blacks to be executives, and he's considered to be a fair employer.
yes.
My problem with giving Trone any kind of pro-labor imprimatur is that he's anti-Medicare for all, and nothing is better for workers than having guaranteed health care provided by the government, which also, by the way, would be good for his business, because that would save him, because he does provide health insurance.
I mean, that's the baggage that my position carries, Sal. I mean, there's no question it's there. But let's get back to any Democrat facing off against Teflon man of the people, Larry.
Well, is he better? I mean, is Trone really better? You point out, look, Trone's been viewed as he's a member of AIPAC. He is actually a member. It's not just that he gets backing from AIPAC. He is a member.
Well, let's put it this way. In my mind, I'm unaware, other than the Islamic candidate that I mentioned running for Trone's seat, that any major Democratic candidate is out of the orbit, whether they take money or not, of AIPAC's policies, preferences. I mean, that I can't change that. I'm not happy with it. You've heard my earlier protests all the session, but there it is. And Hogan says I'll be as good as Ben Cardin. So there, right? I mean,
I'll be as bad as bad. I'll be as bad. I'll be as good as the anti-BDS guy who wanted to outlaw boycott, divestment, and
the slogan,
sanctions.
The quick slogan put down of Ben Cardin was, he's Israel's senator, in the U.S. Congress, and I can't dispute that. But now back to Hogan here, and any Democrats running into Hogan is like the Reagan Teflon candidate. He's everyman. And I was kidding in my posting about it. What's his net worth? We never learned that. He's a man of the people, common sense, and yet versus any institutional Democrat in the Senate seat, I have to believe that Hogan's going to vote anti-regulatory and anti-environment when it comes down to crucial issues.
Would he vote? Is there any chance if we had either? Well, let me give two scenarios. One, Biden gets reelected, Hogan wins. Is there any chance Hogan would buck a call by a majority leader, assuming that Republicans also take back the Senate by virtue of his winning this race? Would he buck a call by Senate Majority Leader McConnell to filibuster any Democratic judicial nominees? Or would he say, no, we're going to have a vote?
Yeah, no, if you accept Larry's positioning and his public statements, he would do it. He's the independent. He's not a Trump person. I will note how, having gone through all the Republican biographies for Trump's seat and for the Senate, that only Dan Cox is the open Trump supporter, unabashedly. All the other ideological positions are traditional Republican positions, but I don't think any of the more than 24 or so combined Republican candidates even mention Trump, which is a signal, that they're in Hogan's, camp.
Well, he's the most popular. I'd say he's probably the most popular politician, period, in Maryland. More so than Jamie Raskin, for sure, I would say. I think Hogan's more popular. Well, Wes Moore would be his analog, right, among the Democrats, I suppose.
And I look at my own life. I mean, in financial terms, what has Hogan done for me except control Maryland's obsession with fees? But in terms of changing day-to-day life in Maryland, he's a status quo politician, and that to me, it doesn't solve the problems that are deeply tearing the country apart: the wealth inequality, lack of national health insurance, and so forth, and housing. Okay, and how we're going to fund in Maryland the grand ambitions that we solve our inequality problems by equal education that we don't know how to pay for, which comes back to the distribution of wealth and income, right? And all the evidence by good researchers that your success at school is determined by your the standing of your parents. Not absolutely, but the correlation is pretty
well,
good.
I mean, I always say my motto for this program is we need a society where everyone has enough and no one has too much. And you can't just say, well, who cares if there's some billionaires as long as everyone has enough to eat? No, when you have billionaires, when you have 100 billionaires, then they corrupt the political system to the point where we no longer have a democracy. So I don't believe anyone should have more than, a relative, a very small fraction of what a few people have. I want to talk, finally, we'll finish off with the congressional race. You've endorsed Joe Vogel, but one more tendentious question. Do you foresee a possibility where the Democrat, or are there, let me say it differently, are there Democrats out there who are so bad that if they are on the ballot against a Republican, you're just not going to vote, or that you just simply could not vote for the Democrat no matter how bad the Republican is?
Given the likely reality in the race for replace David Trone in the 6th district, no, it doesn't look that way. And I sent you the email today that shows Joe Vogel very, very much in with Israel, 100% almost.
Yeah, that's very upsetting to me. That's my reason that I can't support Joe Vogel. But I do recognize there's some silver among the dross, which you certainly point out, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a game breaker. I mean, he did reach out to me among all the candidates. I didn't know him. I've never corresponded with him.
He's very affable. He has charisma. And he's not your Joe Biden Democrat.
I ran through the drift of my writings on Gaza and Palestine and Netanyahu, and he listened. We did not get into it. So he's got discipline, self-discipline. And it was a nice gesture. It's not my only determination, but I look at the Republican side, and they're Republican ideology all the way, whether they say they're anything to do with Trump or not. And so that's where we are. So I don't regret it. I don't know whether Joe can pull it off. He's running against.
He might be the most electable, right, of the group. Delaney, I guess April Delaney, who's the conservative wife of the former conservative Democratic Congress member from the 6th District, John Delaney. So she's probably the, and you said your choices aren't the establishment choices, and the Maryland Democratic establishment has rallied behind Angela Alsobrooks, not David Trone for Senate. U.S. Senate, they've rallied behind April Delaney, not Joe Vogel for 6th District Congress. So that's the reason you said that, because it's true. These are not who the establishment wants. And Vogel, to his credit, he's got the teachers union endorsement, which I give a lot of credence to. I also like the flight attendants union. Sarah Nelson is a great progressive activist.
Exactly.
So good for her to endorse in this race.
Well, one of the factors is the emotional edge that Joe seemed to convey, going right after the weak points in April Delaney's resume and her overdoing the bipartisanship and social life circle. And I tried to handle that lightheartedly in terms of my zip code being 1-to-1 there with Potomac at my $2 to $5 donation history. My zip code really got around, and I don't have that type of anything close to that money, but I like the fighter in a race against a Republican ideologue, because if it's all Larry Hogan bipartisanship, the voter learns nothing about the big issues of the day. And it seemed to me, with the exception of the Israeli situation, that Vogel is gonna fight very hard, even if he loses. So it has educational value. And I know you can make the skin. You could have made that argument for the mayor of Hagerstown, but I was
going to say, I wanted you to weigh in on her as well.
And I tried to give a shout out to other candidates.
You did.
I thought are worthy up and comers, not ready yet to win an election.
Wait, what's her name again? It's Tamika something. What is it? Tamika Rod? I don't want to guess.
Yes, it is Takesha A. Martinez.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Takesha. I apologize for getting that wrong. And I knew it was a Latino name, but I I didn't want to guess. So I heard she's really good, right? She's probably on the issues. You're closer to her than anyone else.
Well, yes, and the interesting thing about what I read about her, and she was a new name to me, even though I'm not that far from Hagerstown. You know, like I wrote this story, and we don't have Maryland people writing, you know, a weekly or monthly newsletter to keep people like this on the radar screens of voters. She's got apparently great people skills. And I think to win that office in Hagerstown as a Black person, you must have and negotiating skills and you know, brokering skills. I don't want to get too carried away with that, but and that combined with the issues, say, wait, this person, and apparently I'm not sure where all the money came from. I think now contributed quite a bit, but this is an up and comer. Let's keep our eye on her, and I'm not going to, you know, after having done this much looking into everybody, I'm not going to write and ignore her. So, you know, that's where it is.
I'm glad you mentioned her, Bill, because like I said, I don't know anything about these candidates. Joe Vogel I've met, but most of them I really don't know anything about. I think Vogel is actually Montgomery County centered, right? I mean, Montgomery County includes sections in both District 6, which is what we're talking about, CD6 and CD8. So I have met Joe Vogel, and he is, like you said, very personable, very affable, makes a good impression. So I can see him having a, you know, successful in politics. But I've also heard great things about Takesha Martinez from people, and I'm glad you had her name there because I was going to flounder around and it would have looked awful. But before we go, I just wanted to make one other point, and then I'll give you a final word. I always give my guests final word, Bill. And I mentioned this to you. One thing I really, what put Joe Vogel on my positive list is that he voted against that Democratic bill championed by Vanessa Atterbury to put casino gambling in every Marylander's living room with the online gambling. And it's awful. It's destructive. It's regressive. It is exploiting people who have a psychological condition known as gamaholism. It's awful. It's wrong. And Joe Vogel was the only Democrat on the House Ways and Means Committee to vote against it. I can't give him enough credit for that. I would note that even Julie Polakovich Carr, who is I consider her a friend. She may not think of me as a friend, but I do consider her to be a friend and a very good progressive. She voted in favor of that bill. And so Vogel, shout out to you for voting no on casino gambling.
Al, 1 second. I got to shut my windows. The lawnmower outside.
Oh, Bill is going. I'm going to, so we guess should just show Hal. I'll wait till Bill comes back. That was quite a little segue, Bill. Thank you for doing that. Let me see if we can get you back on as quickly as possible because I don't really want to carry the show. I wasn't prepared for that. All right, Bill's back. Let's see if we can get Bill. We're just Hal and guess. All right, you're up, Bill. Final word, and then I'll be back tomorrow for the free-for-all, which, by the way, is going to start at 11:30 sharp, not noon. Anyone who is really the top, I'll be on at 11:30.
How you're taking a profoundly moral stance against gambling, the widespread use of gambling. What are you against higher taxes in some way? I mean, you know, that's the rise.
No, I'm for higher taxes. I'm for much higher taxes on the wealthy. I told you, everyone has enough and no one has too much.
But gambling and lotteries and now betting on sports is the American way to pay for ambiguous government programs without, using the cruel power.
But without the rich and powerful having to pay a little more. That's true.
Well, I'm doing this tongue in cheek.
I know you're being facetious. I got it. I didn't just fall off the turnip truck. I fell off it 2 days ago. So
yeah.
All right. So final words, Bill. Anything else? Anything you want to just?
Yeah. I wish I could give your listeners and my readers a more optimistic take on the situation, but true to my own history and my reading and stuff, we are in a Weimar moment in national politics with the world on fire, as it was in the late 1930s, especially 36 to 38. And I won't list all the places where the the fires are burning, but everybody knows these days. So, I hope we have a happier outcome. That's possible. The final outcome of the election is not written yet. My writing is intended by being blunt and realistic to head off the worst. I call it the way I see it, and comparable situations in the Middle East. Very much no happy endings in sight, and no real endorsable alternatives to who's speaking for Palestinians right now, and that's sad for everybody.
Bill, you hear the music. I got to say thank you so much. I want to do this again soon, and again, I'll be back tomorrow at 11:30. Thanks, Bill Neal.
Thanks for having me, Hal. I enjoyed it.